Look what's happening in Hong Kong. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is going to fall. It's going to fall. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And why do I say, and why am I so determined on believing that that's going to happen? People want to be free. People want liberty. They didn't wake up one day and it wasn't the government, and during our Revolutionary War, it wasn't the government that put into the hearts of people the idea of freedom and liberty. It's a divine gift from God to be free.
Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Philipp. Today we have with us Steve Rogers, guy you might know. Real pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So Steve is with the Trump Advisory Board. He's the former Lieutenant Colonel of the U.S. Navy. He's here to talk to us about his new book, Governing the Affairs of the People, a moral guide for politicians. So Steve, tell us about your book.
Well, I couldn't have framed it any better. Certainly a moral guide for politicians. I'm an elected official in the township of the state of New Jersey. And when I first ran for office, I began to encounter many challenges, as people in politics will. And many of those challenges led me to a point where I'd have to make a choice, compromise on my beliefs, on my faith, or do the right thing. So I went looking around for guidance. I tried to find people who could give you good advice, and I learned real quick, you can't trust everybody, because it seems to me that a lot of people in politics, maybe far too many, have their own agenda. So I decided to go to libraries. I went to bookstores, and I'm looking at all sorts of books about politics and how political people should govern the affairs of the people. But I did not find anything that would be a real good guide with regard to governing the affairs of the people with integrity. So I decided to write a book. And that book is entitled Governing the Affairs of the People. And that book is framed around many, many principles that are written in the Holy Word of God, the Holy Bible. And it's probably the only one, as far as I know, on the market now that truly addresses God, country, politics, and governing.
And I think this brings up one of the big questions is, can we get government away from morals? And can we get it away from, say, traditional religion? And as far as in my perspective, I think even atheism is going to be guided by some kind of value system. Is it possible for law to not reflect a value system? Because I know people talk about separation of church and state, but is that possible? I mean, what's your take on this?
Look, no, look, we've heard for at least my entire lifetime this idea of separation of church and state. Well, sure, there are laws that will advocate the separation of church and state, but there's no law that will ever separate God and man. It's just not going to happen. Now, with regard to can we effectively govern it without the moral standard that at least the Bible, at least God has given us, absolutely impossible. Everything we do, everything we say, every law passed goes back to biblical principles, whether it be the Ten Commandments or before that. The fact of the matter is, since the Garden of Eden, there have been laws. And in the Garden of Eden, there was a law, one law that God gave Adam, and he broke that law. And as a result, we saw sin enter into mankind. Now, saying that, I was told a long time ago by a good friend of mine that we could speak to people till we're blue in the face about living up to moral principles, healthy principles, God, country, family. Nothing changes unless the human heart changes. And God is in control of the human heart. So it's our duty, I think, in politics to be living examples of God's law, to be those who will plant seeds in the lives of our constituents that, no, we're not all corrupt. No, we're not going to compromise. We are going to follow principles that strengthen what? Not the relationship between church and state, but the relationship between God and man. That's how we win that war.
And I think we're seeing now in politics there's a lot of corruption. I think in the United States we're starting to see it. It's hard not to see it. And of course, talk about draining the swamp and all these things. And whatever side you're on, I mean, I would argue political corruption is a big issue. And I know that in your book you write about an example of this. A guy tried giving you money. Tell us about the story.
Well, when I was elected to office in 2012, about 2 weeks after sitting in my office, literally behind my desk, a secretary had called me and said there was a gentleman waiting to see me. No appointment, just came in, and I've had an open door policy, so I said, sure, come on in, what can I do for you? So he started to congratulate me, kind of softening the target, and he said to me, look, he says, I need a favor. And the favor was focused on me doing something that I knew was at the very least unethically, but at the very most, it could have been a criminal act. So I said, look, I don't work that way. I'm the new sheriff in town, and there's no way that I'm going to compromise on the oath of office I took or compromise my beliefs. So he looked at me and he said, well, look, there's something that's coming with this. And he takes his wallet out and puts it on my desk. So I said, well, what's that? And he says, you know what it is. Sure, I knew what it was. It was a bribe. I mean, but nobody would, mention the word, or at least he wouldn't. So I said to him, look, here's how this works. You're going to get up, take your wallet, and you're going to leave, or I'm going to call the prosecutor's office. So what does he do? He takes his wallet, he gets up, but he pauses at the exit. And he looks at me, and he puts the wallet up, and he says, you got to understand something. They all did it. Every single one of them did it. Now, I knew full well what he was telling me was that all politicians are corrupt. They all, at some time, will have a price on their head. They will pay a price for political support. I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in serving the people. And the strength that I got to do that was from what I've read in the Bible, the written word of God. If you have faith and you live by those principles, you know what? You're going to come out okay. Now, I also share this with people. Nobody's perfect. Do I sin? You bet I do. Do I make mistakes? Absolutely. Do I have to get on my knees and say, Lord, forgive me. Why did I do that? Why did I make that decision? And it all boils down to when you're put in a position to make decisions in politics, always take a step back. Always count to 10, and always take out the little Bible you might have with you or on your desk. And the question is, what would God want you to do? And that's what brought me to a successful political career.
Now, what are some of when you made that decision that you're not going to compromise your values for the sake of money, what are some of the guidances, the moral guidances that led you to make that decision? That maybe some from your book you've mentioned.
Well, one moral guidance, Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. Now, it may not mean a physical death, but it'll certainly mean a spiritual death. I've shared with people in politics, and many people even out of politics, because this is a game, it's a blood sport where there's a lot of temptation, sex, immorality. I've had friends of mine that really puts me in a bad position at times. I'm out at a convention or conference, friends of mine are in politics, they're married, and they're, have another woman on their lap, or they're fooling around on them, or they're cheating on them. Now I'm watching this stuff. So one thing that I did early on was when we went to political conventions, me and my team, I told them to find out where all the action is. And then I want you to rent rooms in a hotel a mile away from where the action is. I don't want any part of that. Because you know what? What were some of the guidelines? The Bible even says the appearance of evil is deadly. So I've tried to share with a lot of these guys that were my friends, say, look, you might have some fun for a moment. You're going to get caught. And if you're not going to get caught by your wife or your husband or whatever, you're going to get caught by God. And then judgment comes. So that kind of shook me up. And when I looked at that wages of sin is death, I realized that I took an oath of office, I put my hand on a Bible, and I pledged to God that I would do things His way. And like I said, not perfect, but you know when you're headed into danger. And you know what? That's when you say stop, turn around and go back.
Yeah, we could talk about this idea of having a foundation for your values, especially when it comes to government. I mean, I would argue that most people want to do right, but they'll do right according to how they interpret right and wrong. I think, funny enough, I think the book of Judges talks about this, that each did right according to his own understanding, right, when there was no written law. And so we're seeing this now with like social justice, for example. It's a political moral system. It's one that can change day by day. The government says, this is the right thing today, you better abide by it or you're immoral. But by traditional standpoints, it may not be considered moral. And I think that's one of the big conflicts we have in society today.
How about I suggest this to you, that as Ronald Reagan said, people know what's right. People are inertly good. People are good. They know what's right. But they try to justify doing what is not right. They want to justify the shortcuts. They want to justify the sin that they introduce to their lives. And that's when they get into trouble. And unless you have a foundation, and I know, we've heard people say, well, you got to have a strong religious foundation or a strong spiritual foundation. I say no. I say if people picked up the Bible that they have, and I'm talking about the Bible with the Judeo-Christian values that this nation was founded upon, if they just start to read it, their eyes will begin to open. And I mean, really read it and understand exactly what those messages are. And those messages are all about what? Yeah, you could do what's right. Yeah, there'll be a sacrifice. There'll be pain. There'll be suffering. But I have not read in the Bible, or even known today in my lifetime, anybody who followed the Proverbs, for example, who followed the Psalms, who followed the path that Christ led us to, where any of them failed. They succeeded. Doesn't mean there was no pain, doesn't mean there was no rain, but at the end of the day, he took them by their hand and brought them across the waters to the other side. And that's how I conducted my life in politics. And I would hope that, and I'm sure I have along the way, have had some impact on other people in political office. And this book, I really prayerfully believe that there's a reason why I wrote that book, and it wasn't just to write it for the fun of it, but it was to get people in politics to understand, and especially, may I add, people running for office to understand that this is no game. You know, you're being put in a position to determine the lives of people, where societies are headed, and you want to do it the right way.
And we can look at examples of countries that have gone the opposite way, where bribes and pay to play is the natural state of business. You know, the banana republics, they call them, countries like that. We can look at the way the Chinese Communist Party does business, where they'll bring $20 million to go make a deal, and $1 million of that's for bribes. That people sell out the people they're in charge of for the sake of their own gain. And I think one of the big concerns with Americans is we're worried that's coming here with some of what we're seeing in politics.
Well, there's an irony to certain things going on around the world. Look what's happening in Hong Kong. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is going to fall. It's going to fall. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And why do I say, and why am I so determined on believing that that's going to happen? People want to be free. People want liberty. They didn't wake up one day and it wasn't the government. And during our Revolutionary War, it wasn't the government that put into the hearts of people the idea of freedom and liberty. It's a divine gift from God to be free, to have liberty, to choose your path in life. And I see that happening in Hong Kong. The young people and others taking to the streets, that's a God spiritual driven thing in their hearts, that they know that they were born to be free and they were born to exercise liberties. Whereas the Chinese Communist Party are atheists. Who do they have? Themselves, right? They look at their doctrines from way back where really it's enslaving people. Nobody wants to be a slave. So they will be enslaved. When I say they, the Communist Party in China will be enslaved by the very people they're trying to enslave, because it is those people who are bringing spirituality into their lives and they're exercising their God-given liberties and freedoms to make sure that future generations of Chinese people will live free. Here in America, on the opposite side, there's a great effort on the part of what I call Democrat socialists. And there could be socialists in the Republican Party, there could be independent socialists. But what does socialism do? Take away your identity, strip you of religion. In America, take your weapons away, your right to bear arms. Bring and introduce into our school system not subjects like history or civics or world affairs to be educated about, but bring into your school system things that you indoctrinate people about. In America, and I know this may be a little controversial to say on your show, because I was confronted with something a few weeks ago regarding the gay community, the lesbian community. There were activists that came to our town hall. They wanted a flag risen. They wanted a proclamation signed by all of us on the city council to proclaim them as a special month. I think June was honoring Gay and Lesbian Month. I was the lone guy that opposed it. And I opposed it for two reasons. Look, you can live your life. I don't care, gay, lesbian, that's between you and God. None of my business, none of government's business. As a matter of fact, I will fight for anybody. I don't care what sex they are, what gender they are. Anybody who lives in America, you fight that they are treated equally. Their sexuality is between them and God. So here's what I did. I refused to sign a proclamation. I refused to take pictures. I refused to take any part of this up against great political pressure. And I explained to the activists that came, here's why I refuse. We have a flag. You don't need a rainbow flag. You don't need this flag or that flag. It's called the flag of the United States of America. It's colorblind. It's gender blind. It treats everyone equally. That symbol of freedom and liberty is for you as well as it is for me. And we have a document. You don't need a proclamation here or there. It's called the Constitution of the United States. Colorblind, gender blind. So I think what we see happening is when these movements begin to be born, they're helping divide the country, and they're pitting people against each other. And what we have to do as political leaders is have the stamina and the strength to oppose that. You're not opposing human rights. You're not opposing whatever people want to do. Look, I'm a liberty guy, right? I'm a guy that believes in freedom and liberty. You do what you want to do in your private life. But when it comes to this government, we have a responsibility to abide by the Constitution. So there's where the great conflict is, where a lot of this is creeping in here, and yet you see in Hong Kong where they're fighting for liberty and freedom.
And we see this kind of natural desire in the human heart for liberty and freedom. It's something that communist regimes that have completely dominated all of society fall because people in their hearts will not give up their desire for liberty and freedom. And it's interesting to think about that maybe there's something instinctual that is just innate in us that has that desire.
There is. And as I explained earlier, when you go back to the Garden of Eden and the story of Adam and Eve, in fact, in my book, I actually explain how they were the first leaders of government, and the government was called Eden, and they were the king and the queen. And God told them, you can do whatever you want, except don't eat that forbidden fruit. And you know, the forbidden fruit, as I look at it as sin, all right? Just don't go that way. Don't do what I'm telling you, not to do. Just don't do it. But that idea that God still gave them free will. He still said, look, you got the freedom to do what you want, just don't do it. And they did it. And as a result, what happened, we are now suffering today for that sin. Now, on the flip side of it, as time goes on and you look through the Bible and you look through how many people really fought the 12 disciples, look at the freedom that innate freedom. Imagine the Roman government threatening you with torture and murder and all sorts of ungodly things. If you, one of the 12, whether it be Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, imagine if they said, well, you know what, we're not going to do this, it's too scary. But you know what motivated them? The heart, as you said, the human heart. There's something innate there that says, we've got to tell people the truth. And what was the point of them telling the truth? The gospel? The truth will set you free, says the Word of God. It was like that 3,000 years ago. It's like that today, and it'll be like that 3,000 years from now. That's something that the Communist Party in China, or wherever communism is, will never be able to defeat what is in the human heart, the desire for freedom and liberty.
And of course, one of the basis of socialism is really this whole social struggle. I mean, we can look at, a lot of people have trouble describing what socialism is. Let's break it down. Marx talked about the 5 stages of society, which was his own theory of human evolution, right? Based on primitive communism, the agrarian society, capitalism. He believed that capitalism would move into the socialist state, the dictatorship of the proletariat, a dictatorship where the government seizes control of the means of production and then uses that absolute control over society to destroy morality, religion, tradition, family, every single institution, every single value, every single moral principle of the society. And the result of that would be the return to primitive communism, the return to destruction. And so the way they achieve this is through dialectical materialism, the living soul of Marxism. And it's a theory based around how to create struggle. How do you create antithesis and then use the antithesis to fight against the incumbent values? The social movements are not the purpose. The struggle, the fight, the struggle of opposites, that's the purpose. It's based on Hegelian dialectic theory. Conflict leads forward. It's based on social Darwinism, right? Survival of the fittest. You want people to fight each other. That's the basis of communism.
Well, look at the fight that the Democrat socialists in this country are trying to create between rich, middle class, and poor. Now think about that. They're trying to convince middle class and poor people that those who are wealthy in America are evil. They're bad people. Why? They don't pay enough taxes. Why? They live off the high hog, and on and on and on. So now you got middle class people saying, why don't they pay the taxes that I have to pay? Why are the loopholes available to them? When in fact, that's all false. The fact of the matter is that those individuals who are wealthy, they're employing people. Thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs. And where are those people from? Middle class level, some people who are poor. Those rich people are developing systems and corporations that are giving birth to entrepreneurship. And again, what are they doing? They're enabling people who don't have to see their dreams come true. So what we have to do is fight socialism by bringing facts to people, like you're doing with the Epoch Times. I mean, you guys it's incredible the work you do in educating people. And we have to do more of that. More people have to do that. So you're absolutely right. You could either have everything for free, according to the Democrat socialists, and at the end of the day have nothing but handcuffs and shackles where the government will control your entire life, strip you of identity, strip you of your gender, strip you of everything, or you could stay with capitalism and you can stay with freedom and liberty. You have a choice. You don't have to be rich, right? You don't have to be poor. You could pick up your buckle straps and move forward. So you're absolutely right. We see that happening today. We saw it back in the 60s and maybe even earlier where African Americans were fighting white Americans. We saw the Christians and the Jews fighting. I mean, all of this was a result of some socialist seed planted somewhere. But what happened? People got educated and they realized, you know what, at least in this country, we're all Americans. Let's work together. So I think as you look back at not only our founding fathers, but I like Reagan was one of the great fighters of communism, as you know. He dedicated his life to that. Today we have President Donald Trump, who truly, you know, I hear people say, well, what's this all about with Trump? You know, why are these attacks going on? He broke the back of the establishment that was doing what? That was leaning towards socialist methodologies. A government, and I'm talking Republican as well as Democrat, you know, we have people in government on both sides who want control over the lives of society. Donald Trump came in and said, you know what, it's not going to happen. I want the people controlling the government, not the government controlling the people. Who's fighting Donald Trump? The government, the FBI, the CIA, some ranks in the military. Everybody's fighting this guy except who? The people. And the people will always prevail.
And that's a real classic idea of what America is. So that was the American experiment, right?
Yes.
Can people, if given liberty, if given freedom, create a harmonious and successful society? And that was the big question that that was the test by fire. That was the experiment to see, you know, what this country would become. And I think it influenced the American character in a certain way where people like to be independent. You know, they're in charge of defending their home. That's why they want guns. They want to be able to, you know, it's a Protestant country and its origins. They want to be able to interpret their religion as they read it and understand it. There's something special about the American character that really has people who don't look to government to determine what to do with their lives and how to interpret what the purpose of life is.
I'll tell you what that special thing is. You just said something very interesting. You're right. People don't want to look to government to determine what their future is going to be, but they want to look to God. They want to look to a supreme being. The word divine providence, the word divinity. All of our leaders from George Washington on, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, there is something in there about divine providence. So I think, and I truly believe that when this nation was founded, to your very, very good point about people not wanting to look to government, they don't want to look to man. They want to look to God. They want to look to a higher power with a divine providence that will certainly be what? The cornerstone. There's the American experience. I don't think there's any country on this earth that has a cornerstone with the Judeo-Christian values that this country was founded upon.
And so based on this American system, what role does government play in your understanding? And how can government fill that role?
Government should empower people. Government should not be giving out entitlements, should not be making life easy for people, and government should not make life hard for people. Government should be there as a guide. For example, look at one purpose of government. We could use our military. You need a strong military. You need a powerful military to protect the people. Look, I've learned a long time ago, especially the first charge of a political leader, whether it be president or a city councilman, is to protect the people. public safety. So government plays a role in protecting your society with regard to the economy. The government plays a big role in making sure that there is a stable economy, that everyone has an opportunity to grow, that everyone has an opportunity to build businesses or do whatever they want as long as they don't break the law. Government has a role in lawmaking, making sure that the laws do not infringe on the rights of the people, as we see now with the Second Amendment in this country. So government has a role to be a guide, to be a helping hand, but not to be the leader of the people. In this country, people lead the government, not the other way around.
And so, of course, we looked at the Declaration of Independence. One of my favorite lines, right? We believe that life, liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are essentially God-given rights, and that government is instituted among men to protect those rights.
And how about this? The first three words: we the people. It says it all. We the people of these United States, not the government, not the leaders, not the White House, not the Congress. We the people.
Great. So you released your book. Some government officials have read it. What's been the feedback?
Well, the feedback's been very positive. I've heard from some government officials who actually told me they felt miserable after they read the first 4 paragraphs, and they felt miserable because they realized they were going down a very, very bad road, which is good, because it got them to thinking, you know what, maybe I can do this the right way and not yield to what I call sin, but corruption and all that. It's been a good guide for people. Also, those looking to run for office. And let me add this. I'll hear from time to time, gee, you know, I read your book, I followed God's principles, I did this and I did that, I lost the election. Why? Because the Bible says this. And I went through that. Believe me, I've asked questions. You know, why isn't I successful here or there? And you finally sit back and you find in the Word, for your thoughts are not my thoughts. My thoughts are as high as the heavens is from the earth. And what that tells me is that God has something greater for you. Man's disappointments are God's appointments. Leaving it in his hands, it isn't a defeat. It's just another step to a greater victory. So that's kind of the feedback I've been getting and giving. And so far, I'm pretty pleased with the way the good Lord's using that book to get to where the hearts of the readers.
Great. I guess just as a last question, I mean, if you were to communicate, if you want people to take home one message from your book, what is it? What would you want to get across?
Trust God. That's it.
Steve Rogers, where can people find your book?
Thanks. Well, it's actually, they could go to a website I have where we sell it. It's on rogersforamerica.us. rogersforamerica.us, and they could buy it right off of that website.
Great. Yeah, shake your hand again. Real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you.
Great. And everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.